Good evening, and welcome to our 2021 Mayoral Forum on Criminal Justice and Reentry. I am Sonia Shields. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Getting Out, Staying Out, also known as GOSO.
And my name is Andre Ward. I will also be the co-moderator with my dear colleague Sonia, and I am from the Fortune Society, and I serve as the Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy.
Thank you to the organizations who are co-hosting with us. These organizations do essential work to help incarcerated and justice-involved New Yorkers, and they advocate for a more humane criminal justice and correctional system. They are the Fortune Society, Exodus, the Osborne Association, John Jay College Institute for Justice and Opportunity, Faith Communities for Justice Reentry, Women's Community Justice Association, Youth Represent, Fair Chance for Housing, Mental Health Project of Urban Justice Center, and Bronx Connect. Thank you to the mayoral candidates who recognize the importance of addressing these crucial issues and are attending tonight. Candidates Yang, Wiley, Morales, and Adams confirmed for this evening, but were ultimately unable to participate. But thank you to Kathryn Garcia, former Sanitation Department Commissioner and Food Czar, Shaun Donovan, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ray McGuire, Financial Services Executive, Scott Stringer, New York City Comptroller, and Joycelyn Taylor, business owner. Addressing the issues that impact people who have been justice involved and incarcerated is essential to making our city a more equitable and just place to live. While we have seen more reforms, the reality is the barriers to housing, employment, and education for justice-involved people have not gone away. Inequities faced by people in poverty have been greatly exacerbated by COVID, and New Yorkers of color continue to be arrested and jailed at disproportionate rates. We look forward to hearing from all of you about policies to address these issues that are crucial for our city's future, and we thank our candidates for participating tonight.
And each of our co-hosts have prioritized a question to ask the candidates. We will welcome a representative from each organization to the panel, and they have 30 seconds to pose their question. Then we will allow each candidate an opportunity to respond. We ask that all candidates provide a succinct response in a minute and a half or less. You might hear our stage manager call time to let you know that you have reached your maximum. She will then give you a courtesy of 10 seconds before muting mics. We thank everyone in advance for understanding our desire to keep to time to ensure that all who have worked so hard to produce this forum and all who have prioritized time to participate and attend have a fair and equal amount of time. Let's begin, Sonia.
Thank you, Andre. Our first question is from Omar Jackson, who works at Getting Out, Staying Out.
Good evening, candidates. My name is Omar Jackson. I'm the director of Getting Out, Staying Out's Cure Violence Program, Stand Against Violence East Harlem. My statement and question that I pose today is, we've seen the negative impact of incarceration and justice involvement, not just on the young people we serve, but their families and communities. Would you commit to more investment in educational resources and job programs for justice-involved young people and crisis management interventions in communities where Black and Brown people who have encountered the effects of over-policing in our city reside, and how would you plan to implement that if so?
To answer that question, we'll start with Ms. Garcia.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. We know that those who are justice involved need to be supported going forward with jobs and housing and food and education to make it so that there is no recidivism. We know that they want to have productive lives going into the future, but we have to start upstream with the causes of much of what ends up being justice involvement. And that means ensuring that folks have really quality educational opportunities and access to resources moving forward. And of course, Cure Violence is a piece of ensuring that we are eliminating what is often turf wars and gang wars, because you are trusted in the community to make sure that you're having those conversations and disrupting the violence that is occurring. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you for the question, Omar. More importantly, thank you for the work you do every day. And I want to say very clearly that I'm not just committed to what you asked, but I have been very specific about the resources that I would designate to this, because at the end of the day, promises only matter if money follows to invest in exactly the programs you're talking about. So I've said specifically within my first 2 years as mayor, I would move $500 million per year from the criminal justice system into community-based programs exactly like you're talking about. And by the end of my first term, $3 billion a year, 20% of the criminal justice budget, going farther than any city in the country. And how can you trust I would do this? Because when I was housing commissioner in this city, I created a first ever pilot where we used our housing vouchers for folks coming out of Rikers. A year later, the results were dramatic. 95% of those folks were still stably housed, getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. It was so successful that 40 cities around the country have now replicated that pilot that I created. Those are the kinds of efforts I've been creating all my career, and it's exactly what I would do as mayor.
Thank you. Ms. McGuire?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. For those who are formerly incarcerated, the goal is to prevent recidivism and to enable our people to return to economy and return to their families. We need to take a holistic approach. We have numerous not-for-profits, many of whom are included here. My commitment is to set metrics and to focus on funding those that deliver. So what does that include? Basic skills training as needed, basic computer skills and literacy, job training. We need to give internships and apprenticeships, develop employee relationships, job placement, retention support. We need to also make sure that we have transitional paid employment programs run by not-for-profits, often in social enterprise businesses that the not-for-profits create. Job writing, resume writing, job interview support, job readiness, personal financial management, all this is needed. Also parenting and anger management, mental health assistance, guidance on access to benefits. And then we also need to make sure that we have parole compliance and then advocate for parole reform. So we need to look at this holistically for those who are formerly incarcerated. And we need to begin today in the urgent system called educational system, which has created so much of a pipeline for those people who leave, who are not educated in the system, who then go into lives that are not productive lives and who interact too frequently with law enforcement.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
I think that the challenge we have is not just to support one-off programs and think that you're making a dent in the problem, because that just hasn't been the case through multiple mayoral administrations, whatever the good intention. We really have to break the school to prison pipeline. We have to stop making money on private prisons, and society has made mint on those prisons. And we have to rethink how we're going to create real criminal justice reform. I really do admire the groups that are sponsoring this event, because you are on the front lines. You are dealing with some of the most difficult challenges when someone gets off a bus, having spent time in prison and trying to cobble together their lives through no real help by government. And you are there to help them elevate. But I do think we have to have a larger conversation, which is why I was the first elected official to say, shut it down and close Rikers. I was the first. I don't think that we should be sending our children to correctional institutions. I think we should be building a way to keep them away from the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, prisons have become big business. They were big business for Republicans when I was in the state assembly. That's why they built them upstate. They're big business today in the private prison industrial complex. And until we cut this pipeline and rescue our children, we are going to be putting nickels and dimes to programs when we should be having whole-scale decarceral discussions to make real profound change. And that's what I'm about in this campaign.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, thank you. And first and foremost, thank you and the various organizations that put this I appreciate it. Yes, of course, I would invest in ensuring that we on programs that are helping those who have been incarcerated. But we also have to have a proactive approach. You know, incarceration and policing are reactions to issues that we haven't addressed as it relates to education and housing and other things that we talk about all the time in communities that are disproportionately affected. So we have to invest in a proactive manner in obtaining better results. We have to ensure, and my goal would be to ensure that we create policies and we invest financially in the outcomes that we want to see. And that includes education. That includes not just job training, but real opportunities. You know, when we look at the rebuilding of Rikers Island, we're going to spend $11 billion to build new jails. If we took those funds and we created jobs instead of jails, we can create 180,000 jobs at $60,000 each. So we have to be honest about, or we have to decide, what are the outcomes that we want to see? Do we want to see people live whole, purposeful lives? Then let's invest in those outcomes. And that's the results that we'll receive. And that's how we'll create a better society for all of us.
Thank you so much. The next question is from Terry Davis Merchant of Faith Communities for Justice Reentry.
Good evening. Again, my name is Terry Davis Merchant, and I'm the Program Director for Housing and Homelessness Grant Making at Trinity Church Wall Street. Trinity Church is one of the main conveners of the Faith Communities for Just Reentry Coalition. My question for you tonight is this. No one agency or individual is accountable for the successful reentry of people who are released from jail and returned to the community. How would you coordinate the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and the many agencies focused on criminal justice and human services? And how would you ensure that nonprofit reentry service providers are adequately resourced and able to support each client's unique needs? Thank you.
Ms. Garcia?
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you do. You know, when I am mayor, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice will be tasked with ensuring that not only are our agencies coordinated, but also that the right amount of resources are available for every person who is doing this work. Because if we are measuring our outcomes, every person that we get on the right pathway is a person that doesn't cost us tens of thousands of dollars a year at Rikers. So it is important that we are making the investment in those people, whether or not they need housing or they need education or they need support with how they're going to interact with their children, whatever that package ends up being, and it's going to be individual, that's always less expensive than allowing them to either end up in a homeless shelter or to end up back at Rikers. It's a much better investment for the city.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan?
So thank you for the question, and a shout out for the amazing work that you do at Trinity. I worked with you on so many different things, so thank you. Look, I've already said that no one in this race is making a bigger financial commitment to exactly the programs that you're talking about that make sure that we break the cycle of incarceration. But you're absolutely right that we need to create real accountability around that as well. And so here's what I would do. As I said, on the day that I announced I was running for mayor, we need a mayor who understands that every issue is an issue of equity. And I would create the city's first ever chief equity officer reporting directly to me, who would have authority to look at every single agency, every single program across the city government and ensure that it's actually making change and creating results. And I would create a coordinated group across every agency, just like I did when I led the strategy nationally on homelessness, called the Interagency Council on Homelessness, where every single agency that touches those families, that has a responsibility, is at the table and coordinating that work. And I would create the accountability, just as I did on homelessness, where we created a HUD-STAT system that measured whether things were working, who was doing a good job, who wasn't. And you know what the result was there? We dramatically reduced homelessness around the country. In veterans homelessness, where we got the resources we needed from Congress, we ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities and states, not reduced it, but ended it. And that was because we created coordination, we relentlessly measured success, and we invested where we need to. That's exactly what I would do in criminal justice and reentry as well.
Thank you so much. Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, you know, we keep talking about this and people have all these programs, but we've done nothing about it. All the people who've had the opportunity to do something about it historically have done nothing, zero. The situation gets worse. So the thing that we need to do is to take the existing not-for-profits that are successful. I have created under my safety and justice plan an emergency social services bureau, which 24 hours, 7 days a week to intervene on issues that are outstanding, that have such a big impact on this part of our population. And that organization would work with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, along with what you're doing at Trinity, which is a proxy for the faith-based community. So I would take the emergency social services, along with criminal justice, along with the not-for-profits and the faith-based community, to get directly to those people who have the greatest need and who will benefit the most. And yes, of course, we would put dollars behind it. It is easy to say, I'm going to put this amount of dollars towards this and this amount of dollars towards this. Got to figure out how you ultimately pay for it. But yes, we would do that. And this becomes a priority. It has to become the highest priority, not something that we just list on the things to do, a list of things to do, and maybe even prioritize that list, but maybe not. I mean, alphabetize that list. We got to prioritize it. And this has to become the highest priority. If it doesn't, the overall impact that it's going to have on the city is going to be material, and it's going to be negative. So I have a plan, including the faith-based community and others to which I've referenced, to make certain that we address this with the sense of urgency that is necessary for it to have today. Not waiting, but today.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
I think to some extent, the solution's right in front of us. I don't think we have to continue to poke at the bureaucracy. I actually agree with Kathryn Garcia. The Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, which does have a commitment to reducing recidivism and other programs, is a ready-made opportunity for us to work strategically on these issues. You know, I've done the audits and investigations in addition to being the first elected official to say to shut down Rikers. And what I showed very clearly was that we are now spending an unbelievable amount of money to incarcerate people on the island, $440,000 a year. But not included in that is a pathway successfully out of Rikers and other prisons. And that means the mayor's office has to lead in building the supportive programs that will reduce recidivism, give equal and economic opportunity. But the structure is there. What we now need is the will to do it. And part of this has to be part of a mayor's overall criminal justice planning council, but it also has to be with a plan to, once again, make sure that we are not operating in silos. I don't think you can separate workforce development, education, and also reducing fines and fees post time served and coming in, and then continue to have to pay for the services or the taxes or the permanent criminalization because you can't get out from under the fines and fees in prisons. I've done the investigations of this. I'm supporting legislation in Albany to change that. That's how you get to the root of the problem. We can't build another bureaucracy. We know what is the challenge. We have to now figure out the best path to reduce some of these challenges for people coming out.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
You know, the good thing about this is that we've had some success stories as it relates to people who've been incarcerated and have come out and have been able to turn their lives around. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is we need to look at those success stories. We have to establish best practices and then make sure that within the city, we have a centralized process that will help to assist everyone who is incarcerated as it relates to what their needs are when they come out. And although those needs won't be the same and we can tweak it per the individual, we don't have to figure it out. You know, if someone comes out of prison, they should already have a specific path that they're going down as it relates to the help that we're going to give them and what we're going to provide. And if we have to tweak it on an individual basis, that's fine. But we know what success looks like. We know what it looks like when we do the process right. So we have to establish those best practices, confirm those best practices, and then get to work as it relates to implementing it and making sure that we see the results that we want.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the Fortune Society. William Scarborough, are you able to ask the question now? Hi, how are you?
Sorry, I could not see before. All right, thank you. And sorry, my screen went out earlier. But my name is William Scarborough. I'm an account manager with the Fortune Society and former New York State Assemblyman. My question really kind of segues into that Omar asked. So perhaps you can elaborate and tell us, if elected mayor, what specific criminal justice reform efforts and investments would your administration prioritize, and why would you prioritize them?
Start with Ms. Garcia.
Certainly. So, one of the first things that needs to be prioritized is to not have our young people end up in the criminal justice system. So ensuring that not only are we investing in their overall education, doing early identification of whether or not you need an IEP, whether or not there's a dyslexic problem, but also if you get in trouble, to be using more models like the Red Hook courts, which has been very good at diverting people out of the more formal criminal justice system. I believe that is a model that needs to be replicated. We also need to lean on our faith-based communities. They have in times in the past stepped in to act as mentors or to act as guardians to young people who have been not yet formally in the criminal justice system, but on the cusp of being formally in the criminal justice system. So diversion has to be our first piece, because that actually an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as the first piece of this. And then I do believe that we need to close Rikers. I do believe that, this is the opportunity to fundamentally change what happens there. But there are also going to be pieces of how the parole system is done that I think are very challenging. But at the end of the day, it's to go back to when someone is coming out from jail or from prison, that it's almost that we have a plan for them. In the same way you wouldn't get released from a hospital without knowing who's going to take care of you. Are you going to need rehab? Are you going to need a supportive nurse? That when you're coming out of jail or prison, that we are going to look at you as a whole person and think about what are the resources we need to bring to bear to make you successful.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan?
Thanks, William, and give my best to Joanne. I have had the honor of working with Fortune Society over many decades and deeply admire the work you do, so thank you. Look, we know that not only is the current system in criminal justice not working, that we are spending over $400,000 per year per incarcerated person to get those bad results. We know that parole, if anything, makes someone after the first few months more likely to reoffend rather than helping them get back into their lives, into their communities. And so we need to fundamentally remake this system. I would create a whole pretrial agency to make sure that we are diverting folks from incarceration in the first place, away from Rikers, away from incarceration, and really directing them to the kinds of programs that we know work. I talked earlier about a very specific commitment, $500 million per year within 2 years, $3 billion a year by the end of my first term that we would invest in those programs. I talked about housing, but we have models that we know work. There's nothing wrong with New York that can't be solved by what's right with New York. Neon, violence interrupters. We have so many different examples of efforts that we know work. Faith-based communities that I partnered with for decades. We know they work. We need a mayor who will actually invest in them and scale them up and ensure that we are breaking that cycle of incarceration. The last thing I would say is we need a mayor who can work with the federal government to end the flow of guns into our communities. Nobody in this race has the deep relationships that I have, not just with President Obama, President Biden, and with Vice President Harris, but also with the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and all of his senior team, with mayors around the country that we need to partner with to create a coalition to hold accountable those rogue gun dealers, hold accountable those who are bringing guns into our city from other states, and end the pipeline of guns into our city.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, listen, there are two answers to this which reform and transform how we think about this. One is education, the other is jobs. The education system has failed, the result of which is that we have so many people who don't feel comfortable, don't have the dignity to participate in the economy mainstream. And when they do, it's not certain we got the right jobs for them. So the first thing is to fix where we are in the educational system. The second thing is for the people whom we fail in the educational system to make certain that we decarcerate. And what do I mean by that? Let's reduce the number of people who need to be detained in the first place. We need to decriminalize the issues of poverty, mental illness, and substance abuse. We need to redirect people to proper treatment, which I talked about in my Emergency Social Services Bureau, which is going to make sure that we intervene. We're going to have rapid response so that we can help the individuals in the crisis before they become a danger to themselves and others. We also need to make sure that we get long-term mental health and substance abuse services that are required so that we reduce the recidivism. We need also to get people treatment before they harm themselves. And also we need to make sure that we get adequate medical care and health care to those formerly incarcerated. And we cannot wait. We cannot wait till the bus drops them off with $20 in MetroCard. We have to start before this. We have to introduce these programs ahead of time. And where we haven't adequately educated, we need to make sure that we have the training, the workforce training, so that the bridge that we need to create is between how they've been educated and the jobs that are available. My plan calls for $100 million to be invested. So we do have that bridge. Education, economics. With no job, you got no dignity. With no job, you got no economy, which is why I call for the largest, most inclusive economic comeback that exists in the city's history, which makes certain that before they get to the carceral system, that we prevent it. And when they slip through and get into the carceral system, that we have a job and dignity for them as we transition them out back into society, reduce, if not completely eliminate recidivism.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
Bill, it's good to see you. And it wasn't too long ago when I was at Fortune Society and got to see you and we served together in the assembly. And mentioning Joanne is always special to me because as borough president, I was able to fund $1 million for the building. And it's still one of the great spots that we were able to do together. So it's good to hear the question. Look, as a former assemblyman, I remember the rush of Republican senators to build prisons in upstate New York. They would take mostly Black and brown children, ship them upstate, not to reduce crime, but to create economic activity around the prison. And we saw what happened to the upstate economy. That certainly didn't work. Then we went to the private prisons and the hedge funders that made all that money. I was the controller who divested from those private prisons, just like I opposed prison expansion when I was in the state assembly. The challenge now is to break the pipeline. And the way to do that, and Ray is right about this, it is about education. But it starts with 0 to 3, giving kids of all economic backgrounds the opportunity to have access to childcare so that women, mostly women, can go back into the workforce. My NYC Under 3 plan would do that. It's time to level the playing field with public education. You know, private schools, they have 2 teachers in a classroom. Why shouldn't we do that in our public schools, K to 5? If we do that, we're going to do exactly what they do on the other side. And we're going to give kids an opportunity to have very focused learning. But we can't stop there. We then have to think about what kids will do with their lives. Not every kid wants to go to a 4-year college, but they should be able to go to a free CUNY school to have the kind of workforce development to bring them into the green economy, to bring them into telehealth, to bring them into all of the economy that doesn't even require a degree, but just micro-credentialing. And while we're helping kids stay out of the prison pipeline, that same way we approach education should be the same way we approach people coming out of custody and giving them the same exact opportunities with workforce development. This is not a $1 billion effort. This is simply a will to finally break the pipeline. I have seen it all my life growing up in Washington Heights. I know firsthand the kids who hung out on my block were the kids who didn't have after school. They didn't have opportunity. I was the kid who liked politics, so I had something to do. It was something that interested me. But so many kids are shut aside for these programs, and that's when they get on the road they can't come back from.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you so much. One of the things that we do have to address are these prerequisites that send people down these paths, whether it be mental health issues, whether it be poverty, whether it be a drug addiction. We have to make sure that we address that and make sure that we're dealing with the whole person. But also we have to decriminalize things like poverty, fare evasions, minor drug possessions. We also have to end the school to prison pipeline for individuals. But I think the biggest reform that I would want to have is that when someone makes a mistake, and we all make mistakes, we make mistakes at different levels. When someone makes a mistake, how can we address it so that we don't put this in a person in a position that the rest of their lives is ruined? We can't be willing to spend $400,000 to lock someone up. When I look at the situation with Khalif Broward, what if we would have sentenced him to a job? Those are the kind of things in the policies that I want us to talk about, investing in the outcomes that we want to see. So my approach will be different. We have to invest in the outcomes that we want to see, and we have to help people to become their best selves, even if they make a mistake. And, we all sat here and we said that we know this and we know that, we know what to do. Well, it's time for us to do it. And I think the biggest challenge we need to have, we have to solve is electing a mayor that's going to not actually just know, but get these things done, because we do all know.
Thank you. The next question is from Walasia Mercer with the Osborne Association.
Hi, I'm Walasia Mercer and a member of Osborne's Youth Action Council. Like thousands of children in NYC, I have experienced my parents' incarceration. I am lucky because I was connected to supportive programs at Osborne and met other youth like me. In 2017, almost 1 out of every 5 high school students reported experiencing the incarceration of a parent. With COVID, it's been a year since children could visit their parents on Rikers and 7 months without visits in state prison. As mayor, how would you ensure that we are seen and supported and that all New York City agencies are addressing our needs, including having access to our incarcerated parents and supportive services?
Ms. Garcia?
This is one of the reasons why it's absolutely critical that we close Rikers, because people who are in jail need to be connected to their families. And right now, it's probably a whole day to get into Rikers. And if you need to go upstate, you're probably taking a bus for a really long time to get to the facilities that are upstate. This is why we need prevention first. But when we know that someone has a parent who is incarcerated, that family is in crisis. We have that information. So we need to be stepping in. Let's have a conversation about where they are with their education. Let's have a conversation about, has this made them less stable in their housing? Let's have a conversation about whether or not they are now struggling with mental health issues, whether or not because the parent is away, they're struggling even to get food on the table. It is a moment when government actually knows there's a problem, and we should be stepping in to mitigate the impacts that are happening. But it is also fundamentally why I believe that Rikers should close, because people need access to their families as well as to attorneys.
Mr. Donovan?
I agree with Kathryn that we must close Rikers, and we must build a system that supports all the families, all of the people who are touched by the incarceration that has for too long trapped far too many people in cycles of poverty and violence. And so I agree on that completely. And I agree as well that we have to find ways to better reach and prevent the kind of challenges that you've faced in your life. And for me, that begins in communities with the kinds of programs that I've talked about earlier. I also believe that we have to build out within our school system a fundamentally different and coordinated approach to ensure that we are understanding the challenges that our kids are going through and bringing them the help and support that they need. It's why I have an idea that is part of my education plan for what I call an education recovery core, particularly at this moment when so much trauma and pain has been visited on Black and brown communities around this city. I would ensure that we're putting young people to work side by side with our teachers in the classroom for academic recovery, but also for social and emotional recovery. It's why we should build on our community schools model to make sure that our homeless children, all children who are facing challenges, have everything they need within their school to take on those challenges. And it's why we have to make sure that we are connecting our school teachers and teams within each school to all of the other agencies that can help on those challenges. That coordination is going to be crucial to ensuring we catch challenges and provide supports before it becomes too late.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
Listen, visitation ought to be a fundamental right. It's essential to the well-being of people while they're incarcerated and to preparing them for successful reentry. We need to make visitation as accessible as possible for New Yorkers with loved ones who are detained, and that needs to be a priority from both the design and an operational perspective. I'm glad to see that the city is preparing to resume visitation, which, as you know, was suspended by the pandemic. We know the issues that many of our children experience as a result of being children of parents who are incarcerated. We need to make certain that today we invest in social services, social workers, those who can give mental health care and give that kind of assistance to us, those who can make certain that the children get to school on time and get fed well, and then expose them to different opportunities that they can explore so that their mindset is not on just one direction, but they have multiple directions, which gets back to my plan for education, which is making certain our kids beginning in the 6th grade get exposed to different career opportunities, different job opportunities. And in the 8th grade, give them summer jobs. We need to give our children the option, even while their parents may be incarcerated, to explore something different, to explore their lives, and to make certain that we have the social services in place so that we can make certain that their mental well-being and their social well-being is cared for, and begin that early. These are not new issues to us. We need to have the willpower to address them today.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
I think the challenge that needs to be addressed is the real mental health continuum that has to take place in our schools. And for me, that's tripling the number of social workers and guidance counselors in schools. Right now, believe it or not, the Department of Education has no one dedicated to the 7,000 children who are in foster care. Think about that. No services for them. Many of their families, moms and dads, are incarcerated. On the end of Rikers, you can see that when 10,000 people leave the system, some go to shelter, some go to different places. There's no way to quantify or think about the services they need. So we have the children with no mental health continuum. We have the parents who are out and about, but there's no way to create a centering of the family. I think we have to explore that. And look, I'm glad that my great opponents are for closing Rikers, because it has started to become the norm. When I was the first elected official to say close Rikers with Melissa Mark-Vibrito, people thought we were talking about revolution, and we got that done. But I want to remind people, it hasn't closed. There's still 5,200 people on the island, and half are truly suffering from mental health issues, and they're getting no supports. Many of these folks are people with families, they have children. So they're not getting help while they're there. They're not getting the appropriate help. That's why they shouldn't be there, and that's why the place should close. But I do think we have to really invest, especially post-pandemic, not just for the children with incarcerated parents, but all of our children are going to have serious pandemic-related issues facing us. And this mayor, believe it or not, we don't hear from DOE, we don't hear from the mayor on any mental health programming. We actually can't afford to wait for one of us to be mayor. This should be happening right now. And as controller, I'm going to continue to fight every day to get that in place for our kids.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, and to the young lady, I just want to say that I'm sorry that you're going through that. I can't imagine what it would be like if I didn't have the access to my parents. And one of the things that I want to say is that we have to invest in a proactive manner to ensure that your parents don't end up in that situation. Because there are things that we've done in this society that, you know, puts people in precarious situations sometimes, and they end up there. But as mayor, I'm going to think about, and I'm going to assume that there are some things that you're going to be affected by because your parent is incarcerated. How would I feel if my parent was incarcerated? So I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think about, you know, what are your housing needs? Do you have the support that you need? Do you have the mental health resources that you need? I want to make sure that we have effective communication with any child whose parents are incarcerated, to ensure that just because their parent made a mistake, that we don't put them in a position where they might end up down that same path. So we're going to have conversations about, you know, consequences, critical thinking. What do you want to do with yourself? But also, and that's going to happen through you having guidance counselors at school or even outside of schools. We're going to create a mentor or mentee program to assist kids whose parents are incarcerated. So we're going to develop programs that are going to ensure that you get the support that you need, as well as your family who may be taking care of you during this time if both of your parents are incarcerated. Because we have to think about what we want as the final outcome for you. Are we giving you the resources that you need if you want to go to college, if you want to continue your education? Do you have all of the resources that you need in school now? You know, do you have the clothing you need? Are you getting the food that you need? We know that these are things that every child needs. And if your parent is incarcerated, the city has to step up and make sure that those needs are still being met.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andre, to ask the next few questions.
Yes, and thank you, Sonia, for that too. And so we're going to turn to Tanya Krupat from the Osborne Association. Tanya? Are you there? And if not, we'll circle back to Tanya. What we'll do is we'll transition to Exodus, Kendra Clark. Kendra?
Thank you, Andre. My name is Kendra Clark. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Strategy with Exodus Transitional Community, and I'm also a survivor of Rikers Island. So my question is, knowing that Rikers is going to be closed and that we're moving to a 2/3 decarceration effort in these borough-based facilities, which reduces the number of jails from 12 to 4, what is the first step you would take to improve conditions of confinement for our detained and incarcerated New Yorkers if elected mayor? And have you met with directly impacted experts about the conditions in citywide correctional facilities? If not, why? And would you be open to meeting with us? Thank you.
And I'll start with Ms. Garcia.
Certainly. So, the first piece of this is, as we think about building the new jails, is that they have services on site, that people can be engaged with workforce development programs, with mental health services. I have spoken to folks who are part of what this will look like. And often what they say is there's no space for them on Rikers now. There's really no way for them to be able to engage with people ahead of coming out of Rikers. And so it is really about ensuring that this is a transition to a brighter future, rather than this is punishment for itself. Because Rikers is a jail. It is mainly supposed to be that you are held there ahead of trial and that you are presumed innocent ahead of that trial. And I know there is some who have been found guilty who have short sentences and don't go upstate, but we need to ensure that there is no solitary confinement, that there is a real opportunity for growth and development while you are inside, but that we are really making sure that it is not viewed as a punishment as much as it is viewed as something that is right before you are found, that you have not been found guilty yet in most instances.
And so thank you for that, Ms. Garcia. We'll turn to Mr. Donovan.
So first things first, we got to make sure we actually close Rikers. And given the resistance that we're seeing in communities across the city, given the budget challenges, it's going to take a mayor who really knows how to move these systems and get it closed. And building the will to do that, building the will to ensure that we are reimagining what these facilities, I won't call them borough-based jails because I think they need to be something else. Reimagining them is going to be a powerful part of that. And that includes getting rid of solitary confinement. That includes really understanding how to build bridges with not just the courts nearby, but with all of the community-based leaders and programs that need to be there. What I would also say, though, is that we absolutely need, to the other part of your question, to engage those with the lived experience of what this means to them, to their families, to their communities, to be incarcerated. And that's exactly what I've done in my campaign. As I was building my criminal justice platform, I went and met with many different groups, had sitting as part of that group that put the policy together, many who have had the lived experience of being at Rikers and have gone and met with the Barred Prison Initiative and so many others that have really done remarkable work changing the life chances and trajectory of those who we once condemned to Rikers. And so that is a fundamental part of how I've led my campaign and to be a fundamental part of how I would lead as mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, listen, I think we all agree that we should close Rikers Island where there's less imagination on what do we do, especially for those who have committed the most heinous crimes, for whom we still need to keep away from the public. And for those who have committed less heinous crimes, we need to make sure that we give them services. For those who've committed the most, we need to maintain that dignity, for one. For two, for those who have created other forms of criminal activity, let's give them the services that we've talked about. Let's give them the mental health services. Let's make sure that we get them adequately trained for different jobs, not the jobs of yesterday, but the jobs of tomorrow, so that we give them the opportunity to, as they re-enter society, that we give them the opportunity to be full participants in society, who have jobs, who have dignity, who can take care of their families. We need to make sure that the restorative justice centers, as I would likely call them, not jails, let's not do this so pejoratively, but let's call it something that is along the lines of decarcerating, not reincarcerating, along the lines of recidivism, along the lines of giving dignity, along the lines of giving the programs that are necessary so that our men and women who have been incarcerated, rightfully or wrongfully, can return to society in a way that makes them productive citizens. So yes, let's close Rikers, but also yes, let's rethink how we're going to go about taking care of the most heinous criminals and those who have committed not such egregious crimes, and let them reenter and reduce recidivism.
Thank you for that, Mr. McGuire. Mr. Stringer.
Well, first, let me say that I have worked with Exodus on commercial bail and fines and fees, holding roundtables with impacted New Yorkers because we had to abolish and continue to fight for-profit bail, the for-profit bail industry. It's a $10 million industry. And I've been proud to be one of the leaders of this effort, along with all of the non-for-profits and criminal justice advocates. But it's not just visiting with Exodus and meeting, it's also, have you been to Rikers? If you want to be mayor, you got to see what's going on there. Have you been to a state prison? Have you talked to people who are incarcerated, who are there for life because of draconian drug laws? And I believe that I have taken the time to round out my own view of this, as well as being a lifelong New Yorker. And I also think the point I would make is that I don't think we should build 40-story jails. The more you build, the more we'll incarcerate. The jail plan was a land use disaster that I would fix upon being mayor, because I'm the candidate who has that experience, and challenge the de Blasio administration. But I also want to say that as we think about workforce development, we think about training and programs, we got to, at the end of the day, get people real jobs. And we also have to challenge the for-profit companies like these construction body shops that are taking advantage of formerly incarcerated New Yorkers. And I think that has to change as well. So again, we have to think comprehensively. We do have to have a relationship between the people on the ground who actually are the people we want to serve. When you look at my career in the various experiences I've had, I have always gone directly to the people who have the knowledge, not just because I was running for mayor and wanted a platform, but because this is the work I've done for 30 years.
Thank you for that, Mr. Stringer. And now we'll turn to Ms. Taylor.
Thank you so much. Listen, definitely I would close Rikers, right? I don't think we should spend $11 billion to build 2,500 or 3,500 new jails, because that's about $4 million per jail cell. And I don't think we want to invest that kind of money in prisons. It just doesn't make any sense to me. At the end of the day, we have to start applying some common sense to the policies that we are creating. If you want better outcomes, then invest in the outcomes that you want to see. That's how we'll be able to have a better New York City. We want to see people doing well, invest in jobs, invest in education, invest in those things. So no, I want to close Rikers, but my goal is to make sure that we have investments that actually give us the outcomes that we want to see, so we can stop having these conversations once and for all. You know, one of the things, as I said, you know who's not out committing crimes? Someone that has to get up in the morning and go to work. Create jobs, invest in education. If that's what we want to see happen, and at some point we have to stop talking about it and we need to just do it. And I haven't spoken with many organizations. I do know many people who have been incarcerated. I know people who have been able to turn their lives around when we have invested in them. I value their expertise as subject matter experts in this area, having been formerly incarcerated. So I'll continue to have those conversations. I'll continue to put them in positions of leadership because they know the solutions. They've been there. They know what works. And I'm always open to having those conversations.
Thank you for that, Ms. Taylor. And thank you again for the question, Counter Clark from Exodus. What we'll do now is we'll turn the next question to the Mental Health Justice Project, the Urban Justice Center, Dr. Victoria Phillips. Dr. Phillips?
Peace and blessings, everyone. Currently, more than half of the people in New York City jails require mental health treatment. While the jail population has decreased dramatically over the last 8 years, the decrease in numbers of people with serious mental health concerns has not been as significant. As mayor, what steps will you take to prevent people with serious mental health challenges from being incarcerated?
And we'll turn that question to you first, Ms. Garcia.
Certainly, and you know, one of the things that we know is that you know, there's mental health issues and we are not addressing them in our school system. They actually appear usually early on as challenges, and we don't come together fundamentally as a society and say, we're going to address that as a mental health issue, as a public health issue, rather than as a criminal justice issue. And this, I think, is going to be even more challenging as we reopen schools, because these children have been isolated for more than a year, and how that manifests itself is unpredictable. We know that there are many mental health challenges out there. We need to be engaging our young people across many fronts, whether or not that's through art, music, sports, or with a more formal counselor, so that we are nipping this in the bud before it becomes something that the criminal justice system needs to take care of, because we should treat mental health as a public health problem and not as a criminal justice problem. But I have to leave at 6, so I have a hard stop. But I really appreciated being here today and look forward to continuing this conversation.
And thank you for that, Ms. Garcia. We'll turn it now to Mr. Donovan, if you're still there.
Dr. Phillips, thank you for this question. And I want to tell you a little bit about my own story, which is that I grew up in this city and watched homelessness explode on our streets after folks were we rightly closed mental institutions that were mistreating people with mental illness. But once again, we didn't come up with the solutions to solve that problem. And I started asking myself, how can it be that in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest country on earth, we allow our neighbors to sleep on our streets? And I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college. I went to work for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And I've spent 30 years working to find solutions to the challenges of serious mental illness. I have a sister who was a psychiatrist working on street teams in New York with the homeless. And I fundamentally understand that we're never going to solve this problem unless we reimagine the way we currently house folks with mental illness, which is our prisons, the mental health wings of our public hospitals, and really focus on housing as the solution. And that's what I did when I was housing secretary for President Obama. We dramatically increased investment in supportive housing. We dramatically reduced street homelessness. We ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities and states. And it's what I did when I was housing commissioner in this city. I went to Albany and I got a New York 3 agreement that made dramatic increases in investment in the services that we needed in supportive housing for those struggling with mental illness. We need to focus on housing. And unless we do, we are never going to truly solve this problem.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Yes, I think housing is important, but we need to get to the issues before we get to housing. We have what are serious problems, which we've yet to address, and those problems are only going to get worse or have gotten worse. We need to make sure that mental health is incorporated into primary healthcare services for those who are incarcerated, including through early intervention and preventive checkups. We also need to expand the number of psychologists and counselors available. As we have seen, and I'm going to say allegedly, Rigoberto Lopez, and I say allegedly, goes into a subway, conditions that we've known about when it comes to mental health issues, and stabs 2 people. As the pressures and impact of COVID only intensify, as the number of people who are experiencing food insecurity only intensifies, as a number of people who are out of jobs, especially in the most underserved communities, only intensifies, we know that the conditions around mental health are only going to get worse. And we need to intervene today with let's take a look at Kendra's law to see how we review that and how we use that to see if we're doing that appropriately. Let's make sure that we've provided as many mental health care facilities as possible. As I talk about Emergency Social Services Bureau, which I would start immediately as I got into office, so that we can begin to address the acute issues of mental health. And we need to start earlier. We need to start with our youth, whom we know are experiencing so many traumatic examples today in the midst of COVID. So we need to start early to prevent, or at least if we don't prevent, to intervene. And then we need to carry that from a cradle all the way up to adulthood. We know what the issues are. We've witnessed these issues before. They've only gotten worse, which means that this has to have the highest priority, and we need to intervene today.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Mr. Stringer?
40% of the calls that come into 911 are not for crimes. A lot of them are for mental health issues in the streets, wellness issues, quality of life issues. But what do? We send the police to do the work of mental health professionals. And that's where the trouble starts. And then when you look at people who are in our shelters who can't get an affordable housing or a low-income housing apartment, the conditions in those shelters are outrageous. There are no services. There's a lot of dangerous conditions. And I know this because I spent the last 20 years in this government actually looking at these issues and challenging the power structure to make change. And we have to come up not just with programs that we throw money at. We've seen that in the de Blasio administration. Part of anytime someone says, I have $1 billion plan, I'm guilty of this myself. Stop throwing money around. We're already up to spending $10 trillion among all of our candidates. What we really have to start thinking about is measuring the programs that actually work. And we have to have the experience to dissect the programs that are failing our kids and people who are struggling. And we have to double down on the programs that are already very effective. And I hope to use my experience in government to play that role ready on day one with an administration that is going to be laser focused on these issues. And unfortunately, I have to leave, and I want to say thank you for holding this forum. I think every candidate who participated tonight will be better for it. And I look forward to working with all of you in the months and years ahead. And to my colleagues, I will see you shortly, probably in a Zoom coming to us. So thank you very much. Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stringer. And we'll turn to Ms. Taylor.
Andre, I'm sorry. And Sonia, I also gave you a heads up that I had to exit. So thank you for having me. I'm deeply appreciative.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
Ms.
Ms.
Taylor.
McGuire, for joining us.
No worries. It was good to see you.
Great to see you always.
Thank you.
Ms. Taylor, we'll turn the question to you.
Yes. You know, with the existence of COVID, we have to understand that there are going to be a lot more people who are going to be struggling mentally. When you have the stress and burden of having to figure out, you know, where food is going to come from, where your housing situation may go, possibly being evicted. And some of those things might lead you to doing something that you may not have done ordinarily, different circumstances. So we have to be able to address those mental needs, the physical needs, you know, the housing, the food security, but we have to address the health issues that are going to come along with this situation that COVID has created. And we also need to get rid of the stigma that's associated with mental health, because that's part of the reason why a lot of people don't seek out or get the services that they need. But we have to have effective communication about the resources that are available to assist people in this moment as well. So as mayor, those are some of the things that I want to implement. I want to make sure that we're proactive, that, you know, if someone has a mental health issue, just like we was mentioned previously with policing, that's not something that should be policed. That's not something someone should be incarcerated for. Having mental health issue is not a crime. It's something that requires that we make sure we give you the resources that you need to be a whole purposeful human being.
Thank you for that, Ms. Taylor. And thank you again, Dr. Phillips from Mental Health Project Urban Justice Center for that question. We'll now circle back to see if Institute for Justice and Opportunity, John Jay Fair Chance for Housing Coalition, Allison Wilkie is available.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, we solved that tick issue. So my name's Allison Wilkie and I'm with the John Jay College Institute for Justice and Opportunity, and I'm representing the Fair Chance for Housing campaign. So currently the New York City Council is considering a bill, Intro 2047, the Fair Chance for Housing Act, that would ban background checks and the use of criminal records in private and public housing. As mayor, would you support removing all barriers for people with conviction records in New York City housing? And if you don't support removing barriers for all convictions, what do you propose?
And we'll start with you, Ms. Garcia.
I think we lost Kathryn.
We lost Kathryn.
So we'll turn it right to you, Mr. Donovan.
Joycelyn and I are still here, and I just want that duly noted.
Yes.
This issue
and then there was T, right?
So.
It is, it's noted.
And Allison, on the same theme, I want you to know that I've been there on this issue throughout my career. When I talked earlier about when I was housing commissioner in this city, I proactively set aside my Section 8 vouchers for folks coming out of Rikers. I got a lot of criticism for that. What are you doing giving this precious resource to criminals? We did it, and it's now been replicated 40 cities across the country. When I was housing secretary, I led the charge on getting rid of the federal 3 strikes rule. And the problem with that is that housing authorities are under state law. There are city requirements. So I did everything I could at the federal level. We now need to go the next step, which is exactly what you're talking about, which is to create laws and requirements that stop the government from restricting access to housing based on the criminal history. But I want to go further. This is what I did as budget director as well. We banned the box in federal employment. We stopped the practice of asking about involvement with the criminal justice system as a part of employment for the federal government. And that is something that we need to do at the city level. So I'm not just talking the talk on this. I've walked the walk again and again on this issue during my career, and I would do it as mayor.
Thank you for that, Mr. Donovan. And Mrs. Taylor.
Yes, one of the things that I have to say is that most people that I know personally that have been incarcerated and come out, one of the biggest issues that they have is the ability to find appropriate housing. You have a lot of people that are working, they're doing their part, but they're couch surfing, right? Going from place to place, because they can't find a decent place to live. And if we want them to be okay, we have to give them the tools and the resources to be okay. So I would support removing those barriers to housing. One of the things that I say all the time is that God created heaven and earth. We created every law, policy, and procedure that exists in this city, state, and country. If they're not working, we have to change them so that we can see the result that we want to see. And we have to start investing. I'm going to continue to say, we have to start investing in the outcomes that we want. One of the outcomes is that we want these people to come home. We want these individuals to be successful. What do they need? They need housing. Let's remove the barrier that's going to exclude them from seeing the success that they would be able to obtain if they just had the resources that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. And thank you again, Allison Wilkie from Institute for Justice and Opportunity, John Jay Fair Chance for Housing Coalition. Thank you for that question. And so we'll now turn to Youth Represent, Balfour Talkie, for a question. Balfour, are you there?
My name is Balfour Talkie, and thank you guys for sharing your time with us today. I'm a law graduate at Youth Represent, which is a legal nonprofit that provides criminal and reentry legal services to youth age 24 and under. My question to the candidates is this. Reports indicate that our city is exploring the possibility of spending $20 million to deploy 475 more school safety agents into public schools upon students' return to school. No matter which agency has jurisdiction over them, school safety agents have the power to stop, question, handcuff, and arrest students. Do you see the spending of $20 million to hire additional school safety agents as a problem? And if so, what's your solution?
And we'll start with you, Mr. Donovan.
So Balfour, the simple answer is yes, I see it as a problem. And it's not just a problem with the 20 million more, it's the problem in the first place of having police in our schools and having a carceral culture in our schools with all the metal detectors and so many other practices that we see. And that's why my education platform calls for replacing those safety agents with what I call PPARs, coordinators that focus on positivity, respect, recovery, and investing in 150 more social workers, all of the pieces that we need to change the culture of policing in our schools into a culture of love and support and respect. And that is fundamental to my platform. And it's something that I've committed to in writing and as part of my plans that I would get done immediately as when I was appointed mayor.
Thank you for that, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I do believe that investing in additional policing is a problem. It's just a more of us being reactive as opposed to proactive, right? So we need to invest in the things that we need to, like I said, for us to get a more positive result. So, one of the things that I've said to people before is, where you don't see metal detectors at jobs. So we don't want to prepare these kids for prison, right? That's part of the school to prison pipeline. We want to prepare them for success. What do they need for that? We have a huge opportunity to revamp education in this moment and teach children the things that they need to be whole, purposeful adults. So instead of investing $20 million in additional school safety, let's invest in ensuring that they have the access to things that will give them an opportunity to explore who they are, to allow us to ensure that they become a different type of adult. Let's take that $20 million and invest it in financial literacy. Let's take that $20 million and invest it in home economics, carpentry, the things that allow kids to, if they graduate from high school, possibly be job ready straight from high school. So no, I don't want to invest in policing because that's not the result that I want to see. I want to invest in programs that are going to allow kids to be purposeful adults.
Thank you for that, Ms. Taylor. And thank you, Taki Balfour Taki from Youth Represent for that question. We'll now turn over the next question to the Women's Criminal Justice Association, Reverend Sharon White Harrigan. Reverend Harrigan, are you with us?
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. I am Sharon White Harrigan, the Executive Director of the Women's Community Justice Association. And so my question is, as mayor, what action would you take knowing that it costs over $400,000 to keep people incarcerated? And there's an increase in pretrial detention for women with low-level property felonies and with serious violent felonies. How would you invest in diversion programs? And how does that plan fit in your larger plan to close Rikers Island? And most importantly, moving the women off of Rikers Island sooner than the proposed 2027. Let's talk about women.
Start with you, Mr. Donovan.
So Reverend, let's talk about the cycle that so many women are caught up in this city and around the country that we need to turn on its head and create real justice and real opportunity. And part of that for me is putting in place all of the supports that we need more broadly in our communities. One of my signature ideas for my campaign is what I call 15-minute neighborhoods. What's a 15-minute neighborhood? Well, if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, you know what that looks like. You have everything you need for opportunity for your life within 15 minutes of your front door. But we also know that the single greatest predictor of a kid's life chances growing up in a family, particularly led a single parent family headed by a woman, is that the greatest predictor of their life chances, even their life expectancy, is the zip code they grow up in. That's because we don't have daycare. We don't have childcare. We don't have maternal health care. We don't have mental health care. We don't have all of the things that we need to support women who are struggling and victims of so many things in our society and our city. It's also why we have to focus on domestic violence. It's an issue in my work on housing that I focused on again and again. And it's one where in my housing plan, I commit to creating a rental assistance program that allows, you don't have to end up in housing court. You don't have to be on the verge of eviction to get help. There's a flexible reserve set aside for victims of domestic violence to ensure that we can house them quickly. And as you know, that is often the cycle that leads to the kind of incarceration that you're talking about. So first and foremost, we have to begin with creating a city that actually works for every woman and allows them to succeed. Second, we need, I got so excited about the first part up on time. So I'll get to the rest of it a little bit later.
Thank you for that, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. You know, I think one of the craziest things I've heard is when I heard that how much money we spend to keep someone incarcerated every year. And yet and still in this city, no one seems to blink an eye about it. You know, that cost has gone up over the years. And every time it comes to things within communities that could actually help people, like, you know, access to music, access to other resources, we have every reason why it can't happen. And I'm going to tell you, as mayor, I'm not going to be willing to invest $400,000 a year in locking someone up. To me, that's not a good return on investment. I think that we need to look at, you know, when people make a mistake, and they end up incarcerated, we have to look at them as individuals. And we have to see, based upon that situation, what really is the best course of action. You know, I had a conversation with someone the other day and I said to them, what would happen if instead of locking someone out, we gave them a job? And the person said to me, well, you know what? We can't just give people jobs, but why not? We can. If we can change someone's life and set them on a different path that will impact their lives positively for the rest of their lives, those are the things that we need to start to look at. So I don't think locking someone up should be our first line of defense, especially given, you know, whatever the situation is. I think we need to start looking at people on a more individual basis. And as it relates to closing Rikers, that's how we close Rikers. We close Rikers because we incarcerate less people. We have less of a need to have these large jails because people are out and about, and they're actually just like in every other community where, you know, we don't see, you know, all of this crime happening. Now we've created that in every community, and everyone is living a whole purposeful life.
Thank you for that, Ms. Taylor. And thank you, Reverend Harrigan from the Women's Community Justice Association for that question. At this time, what I'll do is I'll pass it back to my dear colleague and dear co-moderator, Sonia, to go into some additional questions from our colleagues in the field and our community members. Sonia?
Sure, thank you. We have a bunch of questions from people in the community, and I'm going to start with one that is very top of mind and making the news. Once New York legalizes marijuana across the state, how do you as mayor plan to use the revenue collected from marijuana businesses to help Black and Brown communities that have and still are plagued by the war on drugs? I'll start with Mr. Donovan.
Thank you. And look, I think this is a real opportunity. We can raise potentially as much as $1 billion a year to put toward breaking the cycle of incarceration for restorative justice. And I think this is an opportunity we can't miss. I'm encouraged that the state has said at least 40% of that money must go to Black and Brown communities that have been the victims of so much of the incarceration that surrounded marijuana in the past. And I think that is a real opportunity to invest, as I said earlier, in the kinds of violence interruption, housing, job training, and other support programs that I've committed to get to $3 billion a year of investment by the end of my first term. But I think we should do something more as well. Why shouldn't we create entrepreneurship and job opportunities around this? Why shouldn't we make sure that Black and Brown New Yorkers can be a fundamental part of the industry and the jobs that are created so that we are actually building a cycle of wealth creation? I started my career working with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood and East Brooklyn congregations to build the Nehemiah homes, more than 5,000 homes, the majority of which were bought by folks moving directly out of public housing, buying their first home. I understand from that experience 30 years ago, the power of wealth building. And it's why my equity bonds proposal is also one of my signature proposals in my campaign. Every child born in this city gets $1,000 put into an account every year until they graduate high school, up to $2,000 more. That means a child born into poverty in New York would graduate high school with $50,000 in that account to go to college, to start a business, to make sure that they can buy a home, to stay in their community rather than be gentrified out. Those are the kinds of critical investments we have to make. And this revenue source is one way to do it.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I have to say is this: when the lottery system started, the whole goal of the New York State Lottery was that we were going to take that money and we were going to invest in education. And we look now, years later, we still haven't seen that investment, especially in Black and Brown communities, that allow children to get the education that they need in the city. One of the things I will do as mayor is ensure that the same thing doesn't happen as it relates to the legalization of marijuana. There have been many Black and brown families that have, suffered the consequences of marijuana not being legalized. We have to make sure that those families are made whole. But also, part of that also includes that ensuring that Black and brown communities have an opportunity to not just, have legal marijuana, but actually own the dispensary. And we have to do that with intention. So as mayor, that is going to be my goal. We're going to make sure that we have the diversity of the dollars going into the pot, match who and how those dollars are spent, who gets the opportunity from, the legalization of marijuana. I know right now, in order to start a dispensary, most people need at least $1 million. We have to create a pathway to ownership of dispensaries that allows everyone to be able to participate. And that's what I'm going to do as mayor. We can't just legalize marijuana and act like nobody's been affected. We're going to ensure that people are put in a position to also see benefit from the legalization as well.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more question from the community, and then I'm going to have the Fortune Society ask a second question. So the question is, mayoral candidates always say they are going to stand up to the NYPD as a part of advancing racial justice. However, reality always falls short. What makes you different? And how specifically are you going to address the widespread police misconduct, racism, and lack of accountability? Mr. Donovan?
So you don't have to trust what I say on this forum. Look at my record. As I said earlier, when I was housing commissioner in this city, I used the housing resources I had to help folks coming out of Rikers to find the housing they needed. And when I was budget director for President Obama, I made sure that we ended giving surplus military equipment to police forces around the country. Think about that. When President Obama came into office, we had a military under the Bush administration that was giving free military equipment to police officers and police forces around this country. Think about how that contributed to the type of mistreatment, the attacks from police that we saw this past summer, and the cycle of violence and mistreatment that we see again and again. Those are the kinds of leadership efforts that I've taken. When I was part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force for President Obama, I ended Ban the Box as we talked about, and I made sure that we led on 3 strikes. We worked with mayors across the country to create real accountability, to change the culture of policing. That's what I would do as mayor. Again, I've walked the walk on this, not just talk the talk.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And, as the mother to a son, this is something that's very important to me. And, I think the question is very important, because especially specifically the part you say, mayors always say, candidates always say, I feel the same way. It's part of the reason why I decided to run for mayor, because we need someone in leadership who's not going to just continue to say what they think people want to hear, but is actually going to implement policies that are going to create change. So as mayor, I'm going to have a level of accountability for police officers and for the unions. Listen, the union has to stop supporting bad behavior. There are so many good cops out there, but because of the fact that they continue to just support the bad behavior, that's all we hear about. But there has to be a level of accountability. We can't give someone the power of life and death in their hands with no consequences. But we also can't have a police force in this city that's supposed to keep us safe that we're afraid of. We have to change that dynamic. So as mayor, that's my goal. I'm going to work with the police officers to create more community policing. Someone said recently, and I agree, we have to bring neighbor back into neighborhood. But there will be a level of accountability, just like there's a level of accountability for everyone else has at their workplaces. The police officers can't be exempt from that.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the next question over to the Fortune Society to ask their second question.
Yes, and Sonia, we're going to forego the second question as it's been asked in so many different iterations throughout the questions that were asked earlier. And so what we'll do is turn to a community question, however. And one community question is, what will be done with fines and fees that the incarcerated are burdened with when leaving prison and their impact on chances of reentry success? And I'll turn that over to Mr. Donovan.
This is an opportunity, as we've talked about with marijuana. This is an opportunity, as we've talked about with closing Rikers. This is an opportunity we've talked about with redirecting $3 billion a year by the end of my first term to invest in the things that we need in our communities to break the cycle of incarceration. First of all, though, we've got to make sure that we're not levying those fines and fees, that we're not taxing poverty, that we're not taxing those and pushing folks into incarceration, whether it's with bail or so many other ways that we compound the challenges that our city is creating already and the inequality. So I would do everything I could to reduce or eliminate those, but where those fees are still available or fines, I would direct them back into communities and into the kind of programs we've talked about tonight that break the cycle of incarceration.
Thank you for that, Mr. Donovan. And Ms. Taylor.
And thank you. You know, when I hear individuals say that, the talk about the city's budget and, the city having revenue, sometimes I almost want to chuckle, because the city, we have to be honest, the city finds every way to nickel and dime the poor people that live in this city. And we have to get away from that model. We are unwilling to tax the rich, but we will nickel and dime the poor people in any way that we can with these fines and these fees. And we have to remove that, because if we want someone to be okay, it's just like with the housing. We are literally creating the barrier that is going to stop this person from being successful. We're literally creating the stress that is going to keep this person from causing a mental issue, right? So if we want to see a different result, we have to make sure that we establish best practices that will give us the results that we want to see. From my position, that means that we need to not impose fines and fees on people. We need to make sure that we're a resource to them and not a burden.
Thank you for that, Ms. Taylor. And I'll turn it back over to Sonia.
Sure. I'm going to call on the Osborne Association, Tanya Krupat, to ask another question.
I'm Tanya Krupat, Director of the Osborne Center for Justice Across Generations. There are more than 800 older people in our city's jails and more than 8,000 in our state prisons due to extreme lengthy sentences. In 2018, the City Council passed the CARE Act, establishing an interagency task force to address the needs of elders returning from incarceration, including housing, medical and mental health services, and navigating technology. The CARE Task Force has struggled to fulfill its mission due to a lack of resources. How would you ensure that older New Yorkers returning from incarceration are supported and have access to services and opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Mr. Donovan?
So I would create my Seniors Bill of Rights for this city. And as I laid out in the only aging platform that any candidate has put out, we need to focus on our most vulnerable seniors, and no one is more vulnerable than those returning from incarceration. In fact, we should work hard to release, to create clemency, and bring home those seniors who are unjustly being held in prisons across the state. And so that's something that I would prioritize as part of my broader aging plan. And that begins with ensuring not only an aging Bill of Rights, but also that every single agency across city government is required to focus on the ways that their programs and policies support or don't our seniors. It includes investments in housing, investments in medical care, investments in all of the things we need to do to make our city easier to navigate for our seniors and people with disabilities. All of that is part of my aging plan that you can see at shaunfornyc.com. I would encourage you to go there. It's the only plan of its kind that's been released by any of the candidates. And it's one that really focuses on this crucial issue you've highlighted and that frankly, we don't talk about enough.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you so much. You know, I think one of the things that differentiates me as a candidate is that a lot of the things that I think about and a lot of the things that I want to implement are based upon lived experience, either myself, my own lived experience, or the lived experience of individuals that I know that have been in these various situations. You know, my mom wasn't incarcerated, but even as a senior who wasn't incarcerated in this city, you know, trying to manage and get the resources that you need was very challenging. And, you know, the biggest thing that I heard her say is that there's a lack of resources. So, you know, and I know that to be true from my own experience with my mom. So as mayor, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make sure that we invest in those resources, things that we know seniors need. First of all, you know, we got to look at people's terms and ensure that we find a path to bring them from being incarcerated to getting home. And then once they're home, we have to make sure that they have the resources that they need, whether it be home health aides, whether it be, you know, assistance with mental health, whether it be medical assistance, because a lot of times they don't have access to the medical resources that they need. As well as transportation, having the ability to be able to get around in this city, and then also making sure that they have access to appropriate senior centers so that, you know, they'll be able to be productive within the communities that they come back to. But the biggest thing I heard was a lack of resources, and we need to just invest in those resources.
Thank you. We're just going to have just two more questions, okay? And I want to make sure we get in these community questions. I think it's important. The one question is, what is your knowledge and feelings towards the Cure Violence model, and are you interested in funding it during your time as mayor? Mr. Donovan.
So absolutely. I think I've made clear in a number of other questions that I have the clearest, most aggressive plan to get to 20%, redirecting 20% of our criminal justice budget toward community-oriented solutions that break the cycle of incarceration, that invest in communities in ways that focus on reducing violence, that treat, frankly, violence as the public health issue that it is, and not just as a criminal issue. And for me, that's what it means to put justice in our criminal justice system. I have seen many examples of this approach that work. The NEON program, I've worked with, I mentioned East Brooklyn congregations going back 30 years. I've seen again and again that there are effective community-based models that work. I often say there's nothing wrong with New York City that can't be solved by what's right with New York City. What we need is a mayor, not who's going to reinvent the wheel, but take what our communities are doing well, take what the Cure Violence and other approaches are doing, and scale it up so that it reaches everyone who needs it. That's what a mayor should do. And that's what I will do when I'm elected.
Ms. Taylor?
Yeah, I definitely support that model. And I think it helps to, I think it talks about, you know, what I've said previously, us investing in and supporting and those organizations and policies that actually give us the outcomes that we want to see. You know, when we talk about gun violence, one, we have to talk about how are these guns getting into our communities, but also bringing back a sense of community. You know, when I was growing up, the officer in my neighborhood, I knew him, Officer Myers, right? It created a different dynamic. So we have to have programs like this in place for us to be able to give these kids and other people resources that they need that are going to take them down a different path. You know, and also when they are going down this path, to also give them the resources that they need so they can find better if they want to. You know, I think that There are a lot of times that people have been, affected by violence within their community, and we need to make sure that we support them. But we also have to be very preventative. And I think, violence is preventative. We see it happen in other communities every day. If you look at the news, you would say, are Black and brown communities the only communities in New York City? Why don't we hear about violence in other communities? It must be because they're getting something our communities aren't receiving. So we have to ensure that every community gets all of the resources that they need. We have to support programs like this, and we have to be proactive.
Thank you. The final question, it's a community question. Do either of you have proposals for reentry entrepreneurship programs and ways to support formerly incarcerated people who would like to start their own business? How would you help to eliminate barriers to doing so? For instance, often people need to find a job to meet the requirements of parole and entrepreneurship if not presented as an option. Mr. Donovan.
So when I heard this question, I started thinking about a recent meeting I'd had with a graduate of the Barred Prison Initiative who had started his own business. And the story was amazing to understand what BPI had done for him while he was in prison, but also the community that had been created of BPI graduates who came together, supported each other. But what he told me was that one of the reasons why he went into his own business is exactly what we just heard, that there were so many barriers to being employed elsewhere, that it was one of the few alternatives that he had. So I want to make sure that we have job opportunities, whether it's in entrepreneurship or across the board. That's why I made sure that we banned the box in the federal government when I was the leader of the Office of Management and Budget. And it's why we need to do that in this city to make sure every job opportunity is available. Second, we do need to make sure entrepreneurship is available. And that's why I have an entrepreneurship venture fund that I'm proposing to create that would be available to start small businesses. It's why I would ensure that we're taking so many of the barriers away to starting small businesses. And that's the regulatory barriers, the fines that we talked about earlier. There's so many ways we stand in the way. And it's also why I have the most aggressive MWBE proposal, including a specific set aside for Black-owned businesses, for Latino-owned businesses, for women-owned businesses, ensuring that we are actively, as a city, encouraging employment. And I think it's worth examining whether we could create a pilot program for businesses started by formerly incarcerated folks as part of that, a sub-goal that would allow us to really grow entrepreneurship across the board. All of those things are possible with the right leadership, and it's what I would do as mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Yeah, this is why effective communication prior to someone being released is so important. Because, the path after release is not one size fits all. And if there are some individuals that have an interest in becoming entrepreneurs, we need to make sure that we give them the resources that they need to be able to go down that path. The city spends $22 billion in the procurement of goods and services. Right now, the city has a goal of 30% that is supposed to be spent with minority and women-owned businesses. That's not even happening. But, as mayor, one of the things that I want to do is that we ensure that we change the procurement process so that we give minority and women-owned businesses opportunities with intention. And we should do the same thing with those who come out that are, incarcerated, that have a desire to own their own businesses. We should make sure that we give them opportunities to become, vendors or firms that work with the city directly. I mean, we have a path and ability to do that. We have to ensure that the diversity of the dollars going into the pot match who and how those dollars are spent. So as mayor, I'm going to ensure that not only do we assist minority and women-owned businesses with getting opportunity in this city, we're going to ensure that if there are incarcerated individuals that want to, change their life by starting a business, that we're not just putting them in classes, but we are actually giving them opportunities. We're helping them, we're giving them resources, we're training them on what it looks like to be able to work with the city. And then one of the things that we're gonna do is also ensure that we have the correct best practices and processes in place so that their businesses will be successful. We're gonna ensure that the city is paying businesses on time. We're gonna ensure that the city has a graduated deposit program for minority and small businesses, which they will be impacted by as well. So those are some of the ways that we can support them, but I think it starts with making sure we have effective communication about what the goals are once you are released.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. On behalf of GOSO and the Fortune Society and all of our co-hosts, I would like to really thank the two of you for sticking it out, and all of the other candidates for participating in this really important conversation as we look towards the future of our city and as we look towards the June primary. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We know that you took in a lot of questions towards the end, and we want to thank all of our guests and all of the action that was happening in the chat and all of the great questions. And we really are grateful for everyone being here. And thank you so much. And thank you, Andre, for being my amazing co-moderator.
Absolutely,
Yes.
wouldn't have it any other way.
Mm-hmm. You guys were amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I learned a lot. I think we all did, and we really appreciate
Sure.
you both and everybody for participating. And have a good rest of the night.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Joycelyn, for sticking it out with me.
Yes, thank you, Shaun. You too. I appreciate it.
We'll see you soon.
All right,
Okay,
bye.
take care.
Bye-bye.